become ecstatic. See, that was actually Eric Samuel Tim's promo video, if you will, for his book, Ecstatic Jedi, which he unpacks this idea of hearing God through all the noise. And if we look at what it means to be a Jedi, some of you know, to be a Jedi in George Lucas's films, one had to master the art of what? The Force. See, in Eric Samuel Tim's book, Static Jedi, to hear the voice of God, we have to look at the life of Jesus and understand how to master the art of clarity. To understand how to master the art of clarity, that when all this noise, all this static is going on around us, to tune our ears to his voice. See, and he says in his book, he talks about how Jesus is our static master. Jesus is the one that we should replicate our lives after, because Jesus did it so well of tuning his ears to the Father's voice. See, to hear the voice of God, we have to understand seeking after Jesus. Through all the noise, we have to seek after him, because the noise pulls us back to who we used to be. When we focus on the noise, we are turning more into the flesh man or woman instead of the renewed spirit man or woman that we've become when we receive Christ. See, the noise pulls us back to our old life. The noise pulls us back to life before Jesus. The noise causes us to pick up our mess that we surrendered at the cross, that like we talked about last week when we were talking about our identity and how we surrender our identity at the cross. And we pick up what he says, but all too many times we pick up our own baggage, right? And if you missed last week's sermon or any of the previous week's sermon, you can either check out our YouTube channel or on the app. You can click Sundays, and then the YouTube sermons tab will be right there, and you can watch them there. But we talked about that last week. And this topic of becoming a static Jedi really just encompasses that as well, that when we are allowing the noise to cloud our mind, essentially we're going back and picking up that old baggage, that old lifestyle. See, Eric Samuel Tim in an interview said about his book, the noise keeps us looking back. We look in the rearview mirror and get so focused there that we forget the windshield that God has laid before us. The noise keeps us looking back, but clarity and pursuit of Christ keep us looking forward. See, the road isn't behind us. The road with the new life is in front of us. See, Eric Samuel Tim also goes on to say that there are 3 paradigms that keep us from knowing the voice of God. The first one is that God owns the entire currency of our lives, not just 15 minutes. See, I don't know if you guys have struggled with this where you're like, man, I don't have time. Maybe I'll try to find a 15-minute Devo. Or now they're pushing even 5-minute Devos of, you want to connect with God? Here's a 5-minute Devo. But if we think about it, then it becomes just a thing that we check off our box, just like I talked about with communion earlier. That, I did my 5-minute Devo for the day. I'm good. And we don't understand that God owns the entire currency of our lives. He owns the other 23 hours and 45 minutes. So here's a stunning statistic for you. The average adult spends about maybe 3 hours and 15 minutes on their phone a day. Now that's probably the middle, and you think about it, I mean, there could be people that are way up higher, or maybe you're like, man, I don't even touch my phone, but the average is 3 hours and 15 minutes a day. That's 22 hours and 45 minutes a week, 91 hours a month, 1,092 hours a year, or 45 and a half days of scrolling, of time that's wasted, that we don't get anything back in return for. See, if we understand that God owns the entire currency of our lives, shouldn't we be giving him more than 15 minutes a day? Shouldn't we be able to dive into his word to begin to hear his voice more? So that's the first paradigm. The second paradigm that he says that keeps us from hearing and knowing his voice is we don't realize, and we sometimes lose the idea or the fact that Jesus was a person. Jesus is a person. Jesus was 100% God, but also 100% man. Jesus had a will. Jesus had a choice. Yes, he's the name above all names, and yes, he is ultimately God, but he is a person. See, and in his book, he says, like I said, that Jesus is the master of static. He is the one that we should follow after in this, when we're trying to figure out how do we hear God's voice through all the mess. So that's the second paradigm. The third one that keeps us from knowing the voice of God is the fact that God has no grandchildren. He has sons and daughters. Based on John chapter 1, verse 12, that says, when we accept Christ, what? We talked about this last week. We take on the identity of being his children. It doesn't say we take on the identity of being, okay, my dad is a child, that makes me a grandchild. No, we are all children of God's. That means that we have to take our own walk. We can't live in the wake or live on the coattails of our parents or of our spouse or of our friend's faith. We have to realize that our faith is our own. We have to take hold of our faith and push to seek after him to hear his voice. So those three paradigms hold us back. But how do we find his voice? How do we know his voice? See, knowing his voice takes time. Knowing his voice takes pursuit. And I believe there's three characteristics that revolve around how we can know God's voice or how we can discern if it's God's voice. And I came across these characteristics during a devotional written by Billy Graham's daughter, actually, and she highlights these three characteristics that I believe are so true. That God's voice, the Father's voice, is biblical, powerful, and personal. See, often in Scripture, Christians are referred to as sheep, right? And Christ and God, or more times than not, Christ is referred to as the shepherd, so we'll stay on that. They're referred to as the shepherd. See, in John chapter 10, this is what Jesus is talking about, where he talks about how the sheep know his voice. They follow him because they know his voice, and we're going to look at that a little bit today. See, Jesus uses this example of the good shepherd to explain knowing his voice. So the first characteristic is that God's voice is biblical. See, God's voice will always be biblical. In the beginning part of the parable of the Good Shepherd, Jesus lays out some guidelines for what the truth will look like. See, before he gets into saying like, okay, they know my voice and they will follow me, he talks about these people that will come up with false prophet, or these false prophets that will come up and try to lie, steal, and kill. See, John chapter 10 and verse 1, it says, I tell you the truth, anyone who sneaks over the wall of a sheepfold rather than going through the gate must surely be a thief and a robber. But the one who enters through the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep recognize his voice and come to him. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. After he has gathered his own flock, he walks ahead of them, and they follow him because they know his voice. They won't follow a stranger. They will run from him because they don't know his voice. His voice will never jump over the wall. His voice won't try to sneak in and say things that don't line up with his word. See, later in that chapter, Jesus talks about Jesus is the gate. That Jesus is that gate that the shepherd has to walk through. So if we're going to assess this and talk about this, we can realize that anything that is said, anything that is spoken, that is saying, like, thus saith the Lord, or I feel like God is saying this to me, we can funnel it through the gate of Jesus. We can funnel it through what he has already said in his word. The voice of God is always biblical. His voice will never contradict what is written in his word. See, in the book of Galatians, Paul has just gone through and is sharing the good news about Jesus, and then he hears about how the church is basically turning from those ways. And in Galatians chapter 1 and verse 6, Paul was writing, and he says, I am shocked that you are turning away so soon from God, who called you to himself through the loving mercy of Christ. You are following a different way that pretends to be the good news, but is not the good news at all. You are being fooled by those who deliberately twist the truth concerning Christ. Let God's curse fall on anyone, including us, or even an angel from heaven, who preaches a different kind of good news than the one we preached to you. I say again, what we have said before, if anyone preaches any other good news than the one you welcomed, let that person be cursed. See, they turned from the truth that they once knew. They turned from the truth that they once welcomed. They started listening to that false voice. They started listening to that static. They let that static of the world overcome the voice of truth. See, we're warned time and time again in the Bible to stay away from these false prophets. But how do we do that? How do we know that, okay, that's a bunch of lies? Number one, we know his word. But number two, we can discern and hear his voice through the static. That when the world says one thing, we can know, you know what? No, Scripture says this, so I'm going to stand on this. See, to truly hear God's voice in the midst of the static, in the midst of everything that pulls for our attention, we have to understand that his voice will always line up with the word. His voice will always edify the word. The two are intertwined. Sometimes what he's saying to you is exactly what's written in his word. So we have to know his word to hear his voice. We have to understand that his voice is biblical. See, too many times I've even heard it said from friends or people when I'm walking around Shawano, or even when I was in college, that said, you know what, no, God told me this. And I'll say, well, hold on, but God's scripture says this, so how can the two be the same? And that's how we have to evaluate whether someone is sharing it with us or what's coming in through our own ears. Is we have to run it through that funnel, run it through the gate of what Jesus and what God have already said in his word, and realize that, okay, not everything that we hear in our head is God. Sometimes it's the pizza from the night before. I love saying that because it's true. Sometimes we have to discern, okay, is this just something that makes it sound good for me? Like I will twist the words a little so that it sounds good for me, or is it truly what's written in his word? See, all too many times I think people will take God's word and they will change the words a little bit just to make their argument sound nice or make their argument sound right. But if you really look at the word and you realize that, no, that's not what the word is saying. You're trying to distort it so that you can say, no, it is in God's word. And that's where we have to know God's word so that we can stand and say, no, that's not truth. That's not truth at all. God's voice is a biblical voice. To know his voice, we have to understand and study Scripture so that when we hear his voice, we will know that it's truth because his voice is biblical. The second thing is that his voice is powerful. In John chapter 10, verse 7, he says, so he explained it to them, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me were thieves and robbers, but the true sheep did not listen to them. Yes, I am the gate. Those who come in through me will be saved. They will come and go freely and will find good pastures. The thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy. My purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. His voice is powerful. His voice is able to lead the sheep while the robbers are not. See, time and time again we read in Scripture, we've heard of this powerful voice of God, where the earth shakes. In Psalm 29, verse 4 and 5, it says, the voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is majestic. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks in pieces the cedars of Lebanon. See, in those trees in Lebanon back in the day, they used to be, they would withstand everything, the wind, the rain, the storms. And what the psalmist is writing is that the voice of the Lord is so powerful that even the trees that you would say, oh, those will never fall down. Look how they've stood. God's voice is so powerful, it will knock down and can knock down those trees. God's voice is powerful. 2 Samuel 22:14 says, the Lord thundered from heaven. Or Hebrews 12:26, at that time his voice shook the earth. See, the voice of the Lord is powerful. His voice booms from heaven. See, any voice that can create the world or cause the earth to shake or cause trees to basically blow up into splinters, I'd say that's a pretty powerful voice, wouldn't you? But see, I think what's even more mesmerizing is those are times that we can say, you know what, yeah, God's voice is a powerful, physically strengthened voice. But what's more mesmerizing, like I said, to me, that is the fact that his voice is powerful spiritually as well. See, his voice tells us that we are good enough, tells us that we are made whole, tells us that we are called, we are blessed. We just sang about that. His voice is spiritually powerful as well. See, God's voice restores our hope. God's voice calls us out of our sin and into his grace. God's voice leads us to finding pure joy and leads us to finding pure acceptance because his voice is a powerful voice. The final attribute of God's voice is that his voice is personal. Our God's voice is personal. In John chapter 10, verse 3, it says, "The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep recognize his voice and come to him. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. After he has gathered his own flock, he walks ahead of them, and they follow him because they know his voice." But if we look back at verse 3, right at the end, it says, "He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out." See, God speaks to us on a personal level. But here's the thing, he speaks to us, it's not a collective, he speaks to us the same thing, the same way. He speaks to each and every one of us in a different way. That's how we know that our God's voice is personal. See, it's a quiet whisper. He speaks to us on a personal level. This is one of the true blessings of being a Christian, is knowing that our God is not dead. Our God is not some statue that we get to worship or anything like that, but we know that our God is alive. He's very much so alive, and he's living, and he's speaking to us daily because he cares about us. His voice is personal. He speaks to everyone who calls on his name. He speaks to all his children. See, later in John chapter 10, Jesus says, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me." I know them, and they follow me. See, God knows us. He knew us before we were created in the womb. He knows about all your mess, all your struggles, but yet he still wants to call out to you and whisper to you and say, "I love you," or "I am here for you," or "You are blessed, you are called," because our God's voice is personal. It's not always a booming voice. More times than not, if you read in Scripture, it's not a booming voice. Were those times where people heard the audible voice of God? Absolutely. Can we still hear the voice of God booming and audibly? Absolutely. But more times than not, what do we hear? The whisper. See, there's a story of a man named Elijah. We just heard about it from Eric Samuel Tim, that most of you are probably familiar with, where the prophet Elijah is seeking after the voice of the Lord, seeking after God's guidance and protection, because the Israelites had literally just gone through and killed all the other prophets because they didn't like what they were saying, because they were calling out the Israelites in their mess and saying, "You're not supposed to be doing this." So the Israelites decide, you know what, well, whatever, I don't care. I'm going to kill all the prophets. And Elijah runs. He runs to God, and he says, "God, help me." 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 11 says, this is the Lord speaking to Elijah. He says, "Go out and stand before me on the mountain." And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire there was the sound of a gentle whisper. See, after Elijah heard the whisper, it wasn't the storm, it wasn't the wind, it wasn't the earthquake, it wasn't the fire. It was the whisper. See, and I think this is such a great representation of how Jesus and how God speaks to us on a daily basis. It's not the big booming things that we might have read about in Scripture. Elijah probably was expecting to hear God move and hear him booming, hear him speak through him through the fire, hear him speak through him through the wind. So he probably had his ear peeled and was ready to listen. But I'm sure God was trying to teach him that, you know what, no, it's not always going to be that time. Sometimes it's going to be my still small voice. Sometimes it's going to be my whisper. And it's the same thing for us today. It's not always going to be, I shouldn't say not, because it could be the booming voice. But 9 times out of 10, I'd be willing to bet that you will hear God's voice in the whisper. But also, you probably won't hear God's voice the same time repeated. When you're in a challenge, when you're in a process, A plus B doesn't always equal C. You're in your struggle, so God speaks to you this way, and then it happens. God's going to speak to us in a new kind of way every time. So we have to be tuned and listen for that whisper. See, it was the whisper that spoke to Elijah, and it's the whisper that's speaking to us today. The thing that's quieter than the rest, which makes it all more that important that we are tuned to Him through all the static, through all the noise of our lives, that we are listening for Him. To hear God's voice. It's a personal whisper because He's close. He's there with us. He's close to us. See, understanding how the Father speaks to us is key to hearing Him through the static, through the noise of our lives. See, His voice should be the thing that we search for in the midst of the noise. Just like Elijah had to search through the fire, through the wind, through the earthquake, he was searching for God's voice, but it was the whisper that spoke to him. It's the same thing in our lives today, that when the world is spinning, when the winds are howling, and the world is saying this is what is true, we have to listen for that whisper. We have to listen for that still small voice that will stand on the truth that is biblical, powerful, and personal. But hearing God's voice doesn't just come like that. It takes time. You know, I've heard it said that love is actually spelled T-I-M-E. And for those of you that were like me, when I first heard that, I was like, what in the world did he just spell? It's like the whole, I'm sure you guys have seen the thing on YouTube or Facebook where they have somebody spell eyes, and then so it's E-Y-E-S, and they're like, what does that spell? And they're like, E-S. And it's like, okay, hold on, wait a minute. Nobody, you guys know, none of you seen that? Okay, maybe I only have. But anyway, so I've heard it said that love is spelled T-I-M-E. It takes time. Those we love, we will spend time with. Those we love and we want to get to know more, we will spend time with. It takes time. But see, it's time we stopped living on the coattails of someone else's faith. It's time we stop living in someone else's wake, and it's time we start realizing that we are God's sons and daughters. And we have to take hold of that, and we have to pursue Him just as much as He is pursuing us. Because sometimes I've heard it said, man, I have to go do my devos, I have to go do my devos. No, it's a privilege, and that's how we have to think, that we get to go do our devos. We get to go spend time with God. We get to spend time in His Word, trying to hear His voice. It takes time. See, this means that if we truly want to hear the voice of God, if we truly want to draw closer to Him and hear Him alone, it will take us stepping out and pursuing Him. See, it's time we stepped out. It's time we learn how to understand and hear His voice in the midst of the noise, in the midst of what the world is saying. We also have to understand that His voice is biblical, powerful, and personal. Mark, you can come up. You know, I want you guys to picture this for me. As I get ready to conclude my message this morning. Picture that you're walking through a big city, whether it be downtown Minneapolis, New York City, Chicago. You're like, man, I want to listen to some music because you're kind of bored and you're just walking, going through life, and you're trying to get somewhere, and you pull out your phone, you press play on your music, and you turn it up, and you just kind of walk around like this. What's going to happen? You're not going to be, you might be able to get a hint of the music, right? You might be able to hear a little bit, but overall, what are you going to hear? You're going to hear the noise around you. You're going to hear the horns honking. You're going to hear the people yelling. So you're like, you know what, man, I'm struggling. I want to be able to hear my music. So you bring it up a little closer. You got it right peeled up right next to your ear, and you're like, I can hear it. I can hear it. But your other ear is open to the world. Your other ear is open to the static, to the noises that are around you, to the city. So you're like, you know what? No, I'm going to pull out my headphones. Whether you have Apple or Android, you usually get these cheap little plastic headphones that are made for everyone, but more times than not are uncomfortable in your ear. So you put these in. You put them on, turn it up all the way. But what? Sometimes you walk around with one earbud in. Maybe you got both of them in. But here's the deal. Even if I were to, obviously I'm not going to hear anything right now, but if I were to plug this in, if I were to turn on my music and I'm walking around downtown New York, you're still going to hear noise. Maybe not as loud. You'll hear mostly your music, but you're still going to hear the noise. So you get sick of it. You say, you know what? No. I'm going to get myself a nice pair of headphones. I'm going to get myself some noise-canceling headphones that are great for when your kids are hollering at you or your wife or your husband's hollering at you. Just kidding. Don't do that. But they are really great because they literally drown out everything else but what you want to hear. See, and there's a bunch of different places that you can be in your own walk with Christ. You know, maybe you're walking through this life and you want to hear the voice of God. Or maybe you haven't heard the voice of God. You're walking around, just like I said, that first example. You're walking around New York City with the noises going around, and you're trying to listen to your music. You're trying to hear God's voice through all the static. But you're not going to hear it very well. You know, or maybe you said, you know what, Jesus, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to put my life in your hands. I give myself to you. That's basically when you're holding it up like this. You can hear God more. You start to hear him more because you've drawn closer to him, but yet you still hear the static of the world. But it's not until we start getting into our devos, spending time with him, that you start to put the earbuds in. And that's probably where most of us in the room are, is that we hear God's voice, but we still hear that static at times. We still hear the static of the world that tries to tell us what the truth is, tries to tell us that it's okay to do this, it's okay to believe that. But really we know that God's voice says otherwise, and that's what we're going to listen to. You know, or maybe you're in the room and you do have your noise-canceling headphones on. That's awesome. That truly is awesome that you can, you know what, flip on the switch and say, God, I'm going to tune to you and I'm going to listen to you and you alone. You know, I'm believing and I was praying last night for awesome things to happen today. I was believing and praying that lives would be changed, that people would go deeper in their walk with Christ. And right now, I really just feel led. I didn't tell Mark this, I'm sorry, but I really feel like we need to go back into the "Oh, Come to the Altar" song. Because until we step out and take time to pursue God, we will never get to the point of only hearing him, of canceling out the noise of the world, of canceling out the static that says that we aren't good enough or that this is okay, that love is love, all of this stuff that sometimes the world tries to feed us that we know is just a bunch of mess. We won't be able to tune to that and hear that and that alone unless we spend time. But before we go any further, I'm going to ask that if everyone would go ahead and just bow your heads and close your eyes.
Hey everybody, Pastor Dan here, and we want to say thank you for watching today's message. We hope that it was a great blessing to your life. And for those of you who may have invited Jesus Christ into your heart for the very first time today, we want to say welcome to the family of God, and we want to get a 5-day devotional into your hands. And you could receive that by contacting the church office or speaking to an usher the next time you're at River Valley, or even shooting us an email, and that would help us be able to get you started on your journey of faith in Jesus Christ. For those of you who are an ongoing part of the River Valley family and would like to help us continue leading people into a vibrant relationship with Jesus Christ, we would ask that you would consider giving online, and you can do that by following the link right here on our website. And the final thing I want to say is God bless you and have a great day.